Piers Morgan sat across from the person interviewing him with a very specific look on his face. He had a big, confident smile that made him look like he knew a secret that nobody else had found out yet. It was the kind of smile a person has when they are holding a winning hand in a card game. Suddenly, he said something so huge and shocking that it sent giant waves of surprise through every single corner of the internet. People everywhere started talking about it. In fact, over 57,000 people were so upset that they wrote letters to the TV station, ITV, to complain. They were so angry that they demanded he be fired immediately. They wanted his head on a platter, which means they wanted him to be punished severely. All of this happened because Piers Morgan dared to say out loud exactly what millions of people were thinking to themselves in private. But here is the part that will really make you feel a chill. Meghan Markle herself, who some people call the Duchess of perpetual victimhood because she always seems to be complaining, actually called Piers Morgan's bosses behind the scenes. She was personally trying to get him kicked off the show. She didn't have her lawyers do it, and she didn't use her official PR team to send a message. Instead, she reached out directly to put pressure on the people in charge to make Piers be quiet. Piers didn't even know she had done this until after he had already left the network. Think about that for a second. Meghan Markle is a woman who often gives speeches about how important it is to have free speech and how people should stand up to bullies. But at the same time, she was working very hard in secret to silence a journalist just because he didn't believe the story she was telling the world. Even though she tried so hard to stop him, Piers says he is still successful and happy. He has not been cancelled, which means people haven't stopped listening to him or supporting him. Why is Piers Morgan still so successful? It is because the truth has a funny way of catching up to people eventually. The proof that Piers has been holding on to is very strong and very damaging to Meghan's story. Piers said that the most interesting thing he realized was just how much Meghan wanted to be in total control of everything people said about her. She wasn't just upset about what he said on the TV show. She was actually leading a secret campaign behind the scenes to destroy his career and take away his job. She did this because Piers refused to go along with the fairy tale story she had been telling everyone. But here is where things get really confusing and a little scary. Everything that Piers Morgan questioned, every part of her story that didn't make sense, and every time the dates of her stories didn't match up, none of it has ever been explained. Not by Meghan, not by Prince Harry, and not by anyone who works for the royal family. When someone works that hard to stop people from asking questions, instead of just proving that the person is wrong, you have to wonder what they are really trying to hide. The evidence Piers has collected isn't just a guess anymore. It shows a very clear pattern of behavior that is quite disturbing. Even some of Meghan's biggest fans are starting to ask the kinds of difficult questions they never thought they would ask. Let's talk about Meghan's pregnancy bump, because this is where the story goes from being a little bit weird to being genuinely strange. Think about Catherine, the Princess of Wales. When she had her babies, she stood outside the Lindo wing of the hospital only a few hours after giving birth. She wore high heels, her hair was done perfectly, and her makeup was beautiful as she held her new baby for the whole world to see. She did this 3 separate times. Every time, she looked wonderful and calm. She gave the public a special moment that showed what it means to be a modern royal mother. She didn't do this just to look pretty. She did it to be transparent, which means being open and honest with the people. She was honoring an old tradition and sharing her happiness with everyone. Meghan Markle did things very differently. She turned her pregnancy into something that felt more like a mystery book where the story changed in every single chapter. One week, her stomach looked very big, round, and obvious. She would hold it with both hands all the time. She would sit down in chairs very slowly and carefully, acting like she was carrying a very precious glass vase that might break if she moved too fast. But then, just a few days later, and sometimes even in the same week, there were pictures where her stomach looked much smaller or flatter. It even looked like it was in a different position on her body. And before anyone says it's just because of the way she was standing or the clothes she was wearing, remember that people are not silly. People who watch the royal family have been looking at these kinds of photos for many years. They know what a real pregnancy looks like when people are watching closely. The way Meghan moved was even more confusing to people. In some videos, Meghan walked very slowly and carefully, with her hands locked around her stomach to protect it. Every step she took looked like she was being very cautious. But then suddenly in other videos and pictures, she was moving in a completely different way. She was seen climbing up stairs very fast, turning her body easily, and bending all the way down without any trouble at all. She moved like there was nothing stopping her from moving perfectly. Now, it is true that pregnancy feels different for every woman, and that is perfectly normal. But we aren't talking about small changes that happen slowly over 9 months. We are talking about giant, dramatic differences that happened in just a few days, or sometimes even just a few hours. In one appearance, she looked so pregnant that she could barely walk across a room. In the very next appearance, she was moving like an athlete while wearing 5-inch high heels. People on the internet started taking screenshots of these videos and putting them side by side to compare them. They made timelines that showed these differences were impossible to ignore. This wasn't just one bad photo where she looked a little different. It was a pattern that kept happening over and over again. She looked very pregnant when the cameras were in the right spot, but then she moved very easily when she didn't think the cameras were watching her so closely. Once the internet starts looking at something like this, the evidence starts to look very bad. Royal fan groups were full of these images. Everyone was asking the same question: how can a pregnant stomach act like this? How can someone move one way on Tuesday and a completely different way on Wednesday? The answer that people were starting to think about made everyone feel very uncomfortable. If the photos made people wonder, the papers that Piers Morgan talked about were even more shocking. These papers reportedly showed Meghan's official schedule during her pregnancy. If these documents are real, they don't just show a different story than what Meghan told the public. They completely destroy her story. For example, these papers supposedly show that she had hospital appointments on the exact same days that she was photographed at big parties and events on the other side of London. You cannot be in two different places at the same time. Pregnancy dates are not something you can just change because you have a busy calendar. Then there was the big promise about her baby's birth. Meghan told everyone through secret stories and her friends that she wanted to have a home birth at her house, Frogmore Cottage. This fit the image she wanted people to see, someone who liked things to be natural and private, and someone who didn't want to follow the strict royal rules. The public believed her because it sounded like exactly the kind of thing Meghan would want to do. But then May 6, 2019 arrived. Suddenly, without any explanation at all, she gave birth at Portland Hospital in London instead. Now, having a baby in a hospital is perfectly normal and very safe. No one is saying it was a bad medical choice. But the problem that no one could ignore was that she never said why the plan changed. She didn't say there was a medical reason, and she didn't acknowledge that the story had changed completely. There was just silence, a very loud and suspicious silence. When you tell the whole world a big story about how you want to live your life, people expect a small explanation if that story completely changes overnight. But there was no explanation. The palace didn't say anything, and Meghan didn't say anything. It was like they wanted everyone to pretend the home birth story never happened. That silence made people start looking back at all her old interviews and stories, wondering how much of her perfect life was actually true. That silence was very dangerous for Meghan's reputation. It caused people to start digging into her past. They started rewatching every interview she ever gave and checking every statement she ever made. They began to wonder how much of the story she had built was actually the truth. This is what happens when a big promise disappears without anyone saying why. It makes people feel like they can't trust the person anymore. They start to think, if this one big thing wasn't true, what else have they told us that might not be true either? It's like a thread on a sweater. Once you pull on one loose piece, the whole thing starts to come apart. This is where Piers Morgan really went after the truth. He made a claim that split the audience right down the middle. According to Piers, there were several different versions of the birth announcement for baby Archie written before he was even born. These were different scripts with different details and different results. They were all ready to be sent out depending on what happened. Think about that for a moment. Who writes different stories about their own baby's birth like they are launching a new product for a big company? Piers said this wasn't just about being prepared or nervous. He said it was about image management. He argued that the pregnancy wasn't something she was just living. It was something she was producing, like a TV show, to get the most attention and sympathy from the public. And the most interesting part is that Meghan and Harry never said this was wrong. They didn't deny it, they didn't explain it, and they didn't get angry. They just stayed silent. In the world of famous people, staying silent when someone says something bad about you is like adding fuel to a fire. It makes the rumors grow even bigger. Then there was a big mess with the timing at Buckingham Palace. This showed everyone just how much of a production this whole thing really was. Prince Harry and Meghan did not tell the royal family when Meghan actually went into labor. They kept it a secret. They had the baby and didn't tell the official royal news team until 6:00 in the morning. Buckingham Palace was totally surprised and didn't know what to do. They rushed to put out an announcement 40 minutes later, but then Harry and Meghan's team said something that made the palace look like they were lying. Harry and Meghan said the baby had been born many hours earlier. This made the palace look silly or like they weren't telling the truth. But really, it was Harry and Meghan who had left them out of the loop on purpose. This was not an accident or a simple mistake. It seemed like Meghan and Harry wanted the royal family to look foolish. They wanted it to look like the palace was hiding information, when really it was the couple playing games the whole time. Piers Morgan talked about this a lot, and he was right to do so. It revealed something very important about how Meghan works. She felt that every single detail had to be controlled by her. Every piece of news had to be shared only when she wanted it. Every bit of information had to make her look a certain way. She wasn't acting like a happy mother sharing a special moment. She was acting like a boss managing a big project, and she didn't care if she made the palace look bad in the process. Once people saw this level of planning and manipulation, they couldn't unsee it. The fairy tale was cracking, and underneath it was something much more calculating than anyone wanted to believe. Now the sad story Meghan told about being a victim starts to fall apart too. During her big interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan painted a very sad picture of her life. She said she was abandoned by the palace staff. She said she was left all alone and had no help while she was pregnant. She made it sound like she was suffering inside a cold building full of people who didn't care about her at all. It was a very powerful story, and millions of people felt very sorry for her. But then some secret office notes were leaked to the public, and they told a completely different story. According to these papers, the palace staff were actually told to do every single thing Meghan asked for right away. They weren't ignoring her, they were working extra hard just for her. The notes show that the staff were changing their whole lives, canceling their own plans, and working extra hours just to keep up with Meghan's last-minute demands. They were bending over backwards, which means they were doing everything possible to keep her happy. The most damaging part was about meetings. The papers show that Meghan was invited to many important meetings to talk about plans, but she simply chose not to go. But later, she told the whole world she was excluded, which means she was left out on purpose. Do you see the trick she was playing? It wasn't that the doors were closed to her. It was that the doors were held wide open, but she chose not to walk through them. Then she later claimed she had been locked out. That isn't being a victim. That is manipulation at a very high level. Piers Morgan talked about this point very hard. He argued that Meghan wasn't being treated badly. She was actually being spoiled, but then she used that kindness to act like she was being abused. The royal family gave her everything she wanted. They did things for her that they wouldn't do for anyone else. They worked their staff until they were exhausted just to make her feel comfortable. And how did she respond to all that hard work? She went on television and told the whole world that she had been mistreated, abandoned, and left to suffer all by herself. If those secret notes are true, and remember, no one has ever said they aren't real, they show a woman who wasn't being ignored by staff. Instead, they show a staff that was being run ragged trying to satisfy someone who was never happy no matter what they did. This really changed what people thought about her. It wasn't a story about a mistreated woman anymore. It became a story about someone who got everything she wanted and still complained that she was a victim. Once people started seeing this pattern of twisting the truth to fit her story, her whole foundation began to crumble. Because if she lied about how the staff treated her, what else has she been lying about this whole time? This is where everything gets very, very quiet. This is also why it is hard to say that Piers Morgan is wrong. With all these big accusations flying around and all these parts of the story not matching up, Meghan Markle said absolutely nothing. There was total silence. There was no official statement from her. There was no spokesperson to explain the truth. Her famous friends, who usually run to help her, didn't say a word. She didn't even try to sue anyone or make any legal threats. This is very strange because Meghan has always been very quick to fix any story she doesn't like. She has sued newspapers for writing things that made her look bad many times before. She has had her friends secretly tell the news her side of the story countless times. But this time, her silence was very loud. Piers Morgan pointed this out on every TV show and website he could. He argued that staying silent isn't being neutral or taking the high road. He said it sends a very specific message when someone makes big accusations against you and shows proof, but you say nothing. You could actually see people online changing their minds in real time. People who used to defend Meghan very strongly were starting to feel worried. They used to say any criticism of her was mean, but now they were asking, why won't she just explain what happened? If these stories aren't true, why doesn't she just tell us the real truth? The longer she was silent, the more people started to doubt her. Critics started looking even closer at her old videos and documents. Without any real answers, people's suspicion turned into a belief that she was hiding something. What made the silence even weirder was that Prince Harry wasn't saying anything either. This is the man who built his whole life around protecting his family from fake news and the media. He has given many interviews about how he wants to defend his wife from lies. But even when there were very specific stories about her pregnancy and the birth of his children, he said absolutely nothing, not one word of defense. If someone was telling lies about your wife faking a pregnancy, wouldn't you be the first person to yell that it isn't true? Wouldn't you be calling your lawyers and demanding that they fix the story? But there was nothing but silence. In the eyes of the public, this doesn't look like being polite or having restraint. It looks like they are avoiding the questions. It looks like they know that if they try to answer, it might make things even worse. It makes them look guilty, whether they are or not. Once those doubts started to grow, people began to watch her old interviews again with fresh eyes. Nothing was safe from being checked anymore, not even her big interview with Oprah Winfrey, which people used to think was perfect. Piers Morgan took that interview and looked at it second by second. He pointed out things that made even people who liked her feel a little uncomfortable. He showed the pauses in her talking that seemed a little too perfectly timed, like she was an actress. He pointed out the tears that always stopped just before they messed up her makeup. He said the emotional parts of the story felt like they were planned to happen at exactly the right time for the biggest impact. Piers argued that her sadness didn't feel natural, it felt rehearsed, which means she had practiced it many times. He said she knew exactly how to act to make people feel sorry for her. Then he did something very tough. He compared the Oprah interview to other times she had spoken on her podcast. He showed that she used the exact same patterns, the same dramatic pauses, and the same careful words every single time. To Piers, this wasn't a woman just sharing her pain. It was someone who had practiced her performance until it was perfect. Once people started noticing this pattern, it became impossible to watch her the same way again. What used to feel real and honest now felt like it was manufactured, which means it was made up to trick people's emotions. This is where Piers Morgan made his most controversial point, the one that got him in the most trouble, but also the one that made the most sense to people who didn't believe Meghan. He claimed that Meghan was using being a mother as a shield to protect herself from any criticism. He argued that by making her whole image about being a vulnerable, pregnant mother, she had created a cultural force field. Suddenly, if you asked a fair question about her story, it looked like you were being cruel. If you asked for a simple explanation, it was called attacking a pregnant woman. Any kind of criticism was turned into bullying or abuse. Society is taught to be very kind to pregnant mothers and to give them a lot of grace. Piers argued that Meghan was using this on purpose as a strategy. He said that every time people started looking too closely at her stories, the conversation would suddenly change back to how stressed and sad she was because she was pregnant. And then, the conversation would stop. No more questions were allowed. Piers wasn't saying she wasn't a mother. He was saying she was using motherhood as a tool to get her way whenever things got difficult. Whether you agree with him or not, it was hard to ignore the pattern. Every time a hard question came up, the focus shifted to Meghan's suffering. Suddenly, the original questions were buried under accusations of being mean. Once people recognized this trick, it didn't work as well anymore. It actually made people ask even more questions like, if the truth is on your side, why do you need so much protection? By the time all these pieces were put together, the weird photos, the secret notes, the silence, and the changing stories, the controversy had grown into something much bigger than just a few pictures. It became a question of trust. People started to wonder if they could believe anything that Meghan and Harry told the public anymore. This is the sad reality. Once people feel like they have been sold a story that doesn't make sense, they start to question everything else. They get very suspicious. This kind of doubt doesn't go away quickly. It sticks around for a long time. It changes how people see every new interview or statement. The damage wasn't just from one single accusation. It was the weight of all these little mistakes piled on top of each other until the whole story collapsed. The changing dates, the office notes showing conflicts, the staged-looking photos, and the pre-written announcements all created a picture that millions of people just couldn't believe anymore. It was especially damaging when people compared Meghan's way of doing things to how Prince William and Catherine handled their lives. Catherine was open and shared her big moments with the public in a traditional way, but Meghan made everything a big mystery, changed her story many times, and then got angry when people asked questions about the contradictions. The secrecy made people suspicious. The mistakes made people doubt her. And when she stayed silent instead of giving answers, people formed their own conclusions. Those conclusions have stayed with her for a long time, and she may never be able to fix her reputation. This scandal didn't happen all at once. It grew slowly and quietly until it was impossible for anyone to ignore it anymore. Once the public loses trust in someone, it is very hard to win it back. Now, every time Meghan Markle speaks or tells her story, there is a large group of people who aren't listening to understand her. Instead, they are listening to see if they can catch her in another lie. They are looking for the next part of the story that doesn't make sense. They are trying to find more proof that her life is just a performance rather than the truth. This is exactly what Piers Morgan wanted to happen. He didn't have to prove that every single story was a lie. He just had to make people ask enough questions so that they would never fully believe her again. And it seems like he achieved his goal. The lasting damage he caused wasn't just embarrassment, it was the complete loss of her credibility. Once people doubt you this much, they never quite see you the same way again. Every time she tells her story now, people are just waiting to find the next contradiction. Piers Morgan's mission to expose what he believed was the truth has made a permanent mark on how the world sees Meghan Markle.